Hey reader, welcome back to the channel. This is Centaur here, and today we're doing something a little bit different. We're going to be talking about, as we're building out our boards, places where you might be able to find terrain pieces that are 3D printable, that are themed around specific factions of the game. And so today, for example, we're going to be looking and starting out by looking at the Zerg terrain. One, because let's just be honest, if you've been playing any game that involves Space Marines, you might have something that maybe works for Terrans. We will be doing the Terran video next. But, if you've been doing stuff that involves cityscapes and things like that, just throw some sci-fi Griblies on it and you suddenly have Terran terrain. That one's a little bit on the easier side. The Zerg side, you kind of need a specific aesthetic, right? Which doesn't necessarily fit with everything. And so it might be a little bit harder. And so I figured, since we're all waiting for the actual models to arrive, and some of us have 3D printers, and there's always going to be those people who are thinking about, well, what can I use my hobby for that will help me with my hobby? Because that's the way that 3D printing works. I want to channel us all in effective and thoughtful and tasteful and excellent directions as regards this. More on that at the end of the video when I tell you, as a person who also does 3D printing, where I'm drawing the line when it comes to this game and where I'm going to encourage you to draw the line. Obviously, I don't live near you, probably. You can do what you want. I am not policing anything. I don't think the team at Archon's going to be coming over to your house and beating you up for anything. So, do what you want. But as somebody who is testing the game, who's walking through the game, who is excited about the game, and who got into 3D printing as a way to save money, I want to give you some ideas that I think will be helpful. Not going to dramatically cost anybody who works for Archon anything serious, that I think will be useful for making your game that much more interesting and maybe even attract some new players to play because they pass by you at a local game store. They see your terrain, they see the game that you're playing, they see the models that you're using, and they say, that just looks fantastic. And so I want to start us off by getting us some high quality Zerg terrain. And there's a couple places we're going to be looking at online that you can easily access. But to get started with, we need to talk about what counts. So when we think about Zerg-themed terrain, there are kind of three different things we need to keep in mind. First is you have actual Zerg planets. Okay, this could be something like Char, for example, where, it's going to be mostly pretty dead. It's going to be rocky, but then you might have some creep going around it. This is, again, one of the most well-known, if for no other reason than one, it appears in StarCraft 1. It also appears in StarCraft 2. And, of course, it's the pinnacle and the climax of Wings of Liberty, which is, I think it's fair to say, the most successful out of all of the StarCraft 2 trilogy. And so people got to that one, and I'm not going to lie, from start to finish, the moment you hit Char to the end of the campaign, like, it's so well done. It's really hard not to love it, right? And then, of course, it makes an appearance again in Heart of the Swarm. So, a lot of people may have played that one, and, who could forget things like the Bone Trench? So, Char is going to be on people's minds, and rightly so. Also, however, on kind of the opposite side of the spectrum, you have planets like Xeris, right? The home world of the Zerg that we get to see. In my case, pretty early on, I typically did Xeris like second, typically, when it came to the Heart of Swarm campaign, which is more of like a jungly sort of format. It's the place where the Zerg species first existed, but then of course it was taken off planet and, you get set up on Char. And then of course the Overmind makes its way over to Ire and stuff like that. Like, there's all different kinds of stuff going on. But Xeris is a very different take on it, and yet still a very essentially Zerg sort of planet and aesthetic, which is cool. Even to the point of plants attacking you, such as the way of things. But you also, of course, have Zerg-infested planets, right? So, whether these are Terran places like Shalsara, which is where kind of the Terrans have their first contact with the Zerg. Places like Marsara, the beginning of the StarCraft 2 campaign for Wings of Liberty, where, it's being overrun by the Zerg by the end of it. And you're like, literally, especially if you play on Brutal, you're just trying to make it off the planet at a point. And then you've got Ire, right? The resting place of the Overmind, which is a Protoss planet, right? But all of them overrun and infested with the creep aspect kind of telling you, aha, there's Zerg here, right? Sort of thing. So, they can look elsewise. And we're going to be taking a look at that too, where, as long as we can make it easy for us to be able to sculpt and paint things up that will make it look Zerg infested, We can even take stuff that has a Terran aesthetic or even a Protoss aesthetic and make it look more Zerg. So the telltale signs, what are we looking for? Insectoid themes, insectoid aesthetics, right? You know, when you look at the buildings for the Zerg, that's going to kind of feed into that mindset. Presence of creep or, you know, vine spreading that we can make look like creep going up onto things. Just really anything that lends itself to kind of painting on creep or sculpting creep so that way we can make it look correct. All of that is going to be essential. And so we're going to start taking a look at what are some of the options available to you. And so to start off with, we're going to go to Thingiverse because, of course, Thingiverse allows us to see the beautiful work of other people that you can technically download for free, right? You go to something that you find online. You can see the thing number up here, 2419334. You can hit download all like I did, and you can go ahead and get yourself some files. But of course, the nice thing about this is when you click download, you also have the ability to throw some love to the author, right? The person who made this, the sculptor and the creator, and give them some money. May I recommend do that? Even if it's just like $2. Trust me, it will make the day of a Thingiverse creator when they get the notification indicating that somebody gave them money. Okay? It's just a really good thing. But as you'll notice here, I mean, there's a lot of different stuff in ranging in sizes, right? And different placements. You'll notice that some of them can become really tall, so they cut off the file just to make it easier for you to be able to print. You don't have to cut it yourself. And then it just prints as 2 pieces. You know, again, you know, different styles and shapes. Some of them lean a little more than others and such. But there's quite a few files in here. Let's see here. Yeah, there's 8 files attached here, which is great. And so, you know, while probably not alone, you know, capable of being everything that you would need per se, it is a really good start. And I think that these sort of things could just dress it up and really help to make it look like you're on the outskirts of a hive cluster, which is great. Also, if you look at the stuff that other things are, you know, other things that people see, it prints well. Right, you know, a lot of people are mentioning that it seems like everything's good with it. We haven't had any major issues with this. Look at this, you know, even dude, thank you for this, possibly the best thing ever, right? Which is fantastic. And they do have their own site as well, so you know, go ahead and throw some love to the creator. Go ahead and check it out, which is great. And so yeah, there's that. Do keep in mind, by the way, My Mini Factory has acquired Thingiverse, so we'll see if any changes happen with Thingiverse. But just, you know, just a heads up, this is currently where it's available for. Hopefully, it continues to remain there. A second place you can go to is places like Imperial Terrain. Now, Imperial Terrain, they do a lot of different kinds of stuff. A lot of the creators, especially the ones that I follow, they play games like Star Wars Legion, which on the one hand means not necessarily going to be a straight one-to-one fit with StarCraft, because I'm going to have a distinctly Star Wars sort of look and feel. You can change some of that, obviously, with painting scheme and painting style. But there are some that do have a really nice overlap. And the nice thing about Legion is the fact that Legion and StarCraft 2, well, and the StarCraft TMG, they share a lot in common. They're not the same style of game. I personally think the rule set for StarCraft is a lot better than the one for Legion, because I have some pretty substantial concerns and issues with some of the way that Legion does things. But I will say this. When you think about Felucia as a planet in Star Wars, and you think about Xeris as a planet in StarCraft, they share a lot in common. And so the result is you have terrain sets like this one, which is, again, it's only $12, right, to buy the files. And then it's 3D printing, and admittedly, you can go as crazy as you want on that. But, I mean, just check it out. The number that you're getting like 20 pieces, over 20 pieces for $12. You're paying less than 50 cents per piece that you're printing, and you're getting a range of, you know, really large guiding sort of things with tall impacts. You've got some smaller ones that you can scatter in more easily. You've got some pools that look like the spawning pools that you collect the essences from in the Xeris style missions in Heart of the Swarm. So like it feels right. And, you know, you can see what they've done. I'm going to show you a little bit later some of the images of the ones that I've 3D printed because I own this set. And this is one of the first things that I started doing when I learned that this game was coming out, was starting to make terrain that was tied to it. But just suffice it to say, like, it's really good. Obviously, you know, they don't get a ton of reviews on Imperial Terrain. A lot of us just buy it. We don't actually review. But I'm going to tell you now, like, they're really highly rated. They print really easily. Which is great. You know, they don't require additional rafts or supporting. There are a few pieces, some of these like wiggly doodads things like this that might actually need to be supported because some of those broke off for me, I just glued them back on, right? Like it wasn't a big deal. But just suffice it to say, for value, this one's phenomenal. And you should totally be taking a look at this one, okay, as one option. Now, there's another way you could choose to go, which you kind of piecemeal it if you're already part of other subscriptions, right? Because sometimes you'll be part of a subscription service and they'll have a few pieces here or a few pieces there that might fit the aesthetic of what you're looking for because they're broken out across different monthly sets. And so there's a group that I am part of, have been part of for several years now. Basically, I just buy their files every month because they do such a good job with it and the quality is always really good. And I don't know if I'm going to need those kinds of files at some point in the future. So I might as well pick them up for a little bit less than I would otherwise do if I wanted to buy them individually. And that is Loot Studios. Now, Loot Studios has a range of different things that they do. They have both a, kind of a relatively cheap subscription service that you can do on the fantasy side. You can pay a second time to get things on the sci-fi side. So just know we're going to be crossing over between those two. They do have a flex program, so if you don't like the set that's currently coming out, you can pick up one from the older stock, which is how I would recommend going about getting these. Because it means for $15 a month, you can pick up multiple sets that are going to be good for you to be able to handle these things without having to be locked into whatever the current thing is that's currently being pitched by Loot. That being said, especially if you play, RPGs like say D&D or Warriors of Zern or whatever, then these could also be really good for you because they'll give you models that you can use. Now, on the lower end, you'll sometimes have like a couple of pieces that stand out. I'm going to go ahead and show you some Terrain just because I don't want to pull this thing up yet again, just to show, repeat this in the same, in the next video we're doing in the series. But you'll notice here, here we've got kind of a raised terrace area. These are nice in the game because size, height is a thing in the game. And so, being able to have higher rise areas, in this case, it's got, 2 access points. But you'll notice the vine work that's coming off of these. That could be very easy creep painting, right? Really, really easy creep painting. Maybe you add in a little bit of extra, wall filler, wall spackle, whatever you want to call it, along the edge just to help kind of flesh it out into the creep that you're looking for to cover over some of those stairs. But it means like, you would have a very easy way of being able to showcase this used to be a Terran structure. It is now very much part of the swarm, right? Which is cool. You also do have, things like, energy cell crates and, geothermal generators, which you can also paint up in order to make it look more Terran-y, which is great. Some nice scatter that you can throw in. They technically also have a fountain, which does have a little bit of vine work on it, but maybe not very much. I would probably skip on the fountain, but suffice it to say, you do have some options there, as well as like a ruined container. So kind of showing, here are the people that, the settlers here, they still were working out of containers for supplies and things like that. But then the creep started taking over and you can paint up creep along the sides of it and stuff like that to kind of make it really look like this place is gone, right? It has been claimed. They also have ones like Saurian Native Diplomacy, where in this case, for this particular set, you've got things like drop pods. Now, drop pods, of course, do exist in StarCraft. Drop pods are a way for you to be able to drop off infantry at other places. They often appear being used mostly by the computer in the campaign, because it's, it's a highly efficient way of suddenly scaring you. Oh no, the enemy's here, and now we got to defend against them, right? Or whatever. Drop pods incoming, right? We're all familiar with that line. And so, they have a normal version that you can use for the Terran, which is always nice. They also have a this thing got taken over sort of version, and then you just paint some creep up there on the bottom, paint the vine work in additional creep as well, and you're good to go. They also, by the way, do have open drop pods, so if you want to have some of those, you can pick that up in this set as well. They've got like old spaceships, but look at all that vine work. We could easily do creep that has crept over this speeder, right? This civilian style craft doesn't really line up with any of the attack craft that we have in the game for the Terran. Could very easily be seen though as a civilian speeder though. So you have options there. Technically, like, there's a little chest sort of dealio. You really don't need to do that. Again, the Saurian Diplomacy set, a lot of the stuff doesn't quite fit the vibe, although if you like spiky trees and knobby trees and stuff like that, like, again, it looks alien. So it could dress up certain stuff. I don't think it quite fits the vibe for a lot of what we've seen so far from StarCraft. And obviously a lot of the more Aztec-y sort of stuff that they have built into the set, definitely not really the vibe that we're looking for. But at least it gives you that option. But I think the biggest one from Loot Studios that you should be looking at is Tenebrous Infested. And Tenebrous Infested, it kind of makes sense because, I mean, just look at it, right? Like the creep's already there and the eggs are already there. And they've got multiples of these. They've also got, here's a larger egg cluster. We'll be taking a look at these two prints, by the way, in a little bit. You've got pools. So if you want to do like spawning pool sort of stuff, they've got them in large, medium, and small sizes. Do you have options for it? You've also got, some infested rock stuff, right? Where you've got some goo that's kind of hanging down off of the rocks to which you can also paint up as creep, right? Which is another level of creepy. You've got like little tiny eggs all situated on stuff. These things are still growing into stuff that we want. And so, like again, there's a lot of cool options and interesting things going on with this that lend itself well to painting and saying, see, Zerg infestation. It's a thing, right? And you don't have to worry about anything else. There's other stuff that may not be quite as useful, and that's fine. But again, depending on what it is that you're looking at, there's a lot here that you could take advantage of. So if I was picking even just one, I would pick Tenebrous Infested. That's the one that I would go with. And now what we're going to be doing next is we're going to take a brief bit from what I normally do where I'm screen sharing something over here. And we're going to take a look at some of the actual terrain pieces that I have printed up to show you what some of these look like so that you can see them in person. And we'll be using Mr. Zeratul as our, kind of for scale thing, because obviously he's the model we all have. So, he's the only model that we can really show really efficiently. This is what scale is because it's the only official model that we currently have available to us. And so let's go ahead and take this over to my extremely messy workbench. And so to begin us off, here's an example of what those spawning pools might look like from Imperial Terrain. We'll be starting off with the Imperial Terrain stuff here. Again, detail is really good. I intentionally left like a little path going down the middle because that is true on Xeris. You will find that there are kind of walking paths going around everything. But you do a simple flocking, you paint everything up with interesting colors and interesting shapes. That way you get a very Xeris sort of look, which is very vibrant. To give you an idea on how big this is, here is Zeratul. You can easily fit 2 Zeratools in the larger pool, and he'll fit on the smaller one. He's a little big for walking between here, so you'd want to be looking more like 32 millimeter sort of model to go between there if you want an easy way. So Zerglings will be able to pass through just fine. Marines will be able to pass through just fine. Medics will be able to pass through just fine, that sort of thing. And again, if you're worried about size, you can always print these larger, right? You can always scale them up. This is just being printed at 100%. And then when it comes to the background stuff, I mean, you can already kind of see it right here. I'll bring it in just a little bit closer. Lighting's not that great down here today, but here we are. But again, just look at the variety of shapes, of colors, right? Different aesthetics of it. It looks like a jungle, right? And it looks like a sci-fi jungle, and it looks like Xeris because of the fact that it's not just all the same thing. And here is, again, Zeratul for size. So it gets pretty tall too, right? I'd say that this is at least a size 2 style wall, so to speak, because it's completely blocking a size 2 model for the majority of what's going on here. It has parts that raise up to like size 3, possibly even size 4 in this case, but again, not the whole thing. So I don't think that would cause any problems with being able to see them. So we'll go from there. And then over here, we've got a second version of it, right? Because they come in different stuff. And this one has a little gap already pre-built into it. And so, a model would be able, I would say, to be able to move through these. Zeratul himself is a little bit of a tight fit in order to fit through, but only because of the spacing on the base and the fact that he's got those sharp rocky bits pointing out from the Hydralisk base. So, once again, maybe focus on the 32 mil models going through there. But, I mean, could make for a very interesting ambush point for Zerglings that maybe it'd be a little harder for a Zealot to be able to get through, which is kind of cool. And I like that. And once again, just various different colors, various different shapes, right? And the texturing is already there. You don't have to add a lot of texturing to it. It's all there waiting for you, pre-printed, which is awesome. But they also come in these smaller shapes, right? And so, you got stuff that's a little more on the smaller side. You can very easily just throw down as a bit of extra scatter, a little bit of extra blocking things. And again, Zeratul for size. Pretty good size, all things considered. But in terms of base, what is that? Like basically the equivalent of 2 Zeratul, so about 80 millimeters across. Not horrible either for some of the smaller ones. And then in terms of some of the Loot Studios pieces, because I haven't printed any of the Thingiverse stuff yet, here's some examples of those Tenebrous infested clusters, the small cluster and the large cluster. So again, like it says large and small. The small one is pretty small. It's only a little more than 40 millimeters in distance at its longest. The other one probably closer to like 70 millimeters, maybe even a little more than that, 75. So not horrible. Good for, just kind of some background sort of terrain alongside the rest of your rocky sort of stuff. And of course, these ones are also technically on the smaller side. So a bunch of the infested rock pieces are a good bit larger than that. I just haven't gotten around to printing those yet. And then you've got the spawning pool sort of stuff. This is the small one. The other ones are a good bit larger. I intentionally printed this in resin printing as opposed to doing it in filament printing because I own both of those styles in 3D printing because I wanted it to be a little bit see-through in the water. So I went with a, kind of see-through clear resin for use there, which was kind of fun. But again, the small one is about 40 millimeters across, maybe a little bit more. The medium one is a good bit larger than that, and large one is even larger than that. So you do have some size and interesting options available for you there, should you choose to go that route. And then here is an example of the drop pod. Now you'll notice the drop pod is only a little bit taller than Zeratul. That makes me think it's going to be a pretty good size for our Marines because Zeratul and the Protoss in general are taller than Marines are. And so I think from a size perspective, it's going to work out pretty okay just to print those as they are. You don't necessarily need to scale them up, which is also good because they don't take up that much of a footprint. And yet you can see the vine work is fantastically good, going all the way around, giving you some very interesting options for where to go from there. All right, so before we close out, there's one topic that I think is worth addressing because we're very early on in the game. Files, STL files for Starcraft related things have been around on the internet for well before this game has ever existed. And I'll be honest, and this has even been mentioned in the Ask Me Anythings, like the guys that are kind of shrugged and just said, look, like we know 3D printing is a thing. For official events, we're not going to allow for 3D printed stuff, and I'd say fair enough. I don't have a problem with that at all. I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing for them to claim. Here's one gamer's perspective on how you should treat 3D printing as regards this game specifically. Okay, with a bit of background knowledge, just know I've been a nonprofit man my entire life. There's a reason why I got into 3D printing. It allowed me to play games and do stuff on a dramatically smaller budget than I would have had to do otherwise. And if you're like me and you play multiple games, then 3D printing just kind of makes sense, right? Because your startup cost is going to disappear because of how many armies you're printing for, how many boards you're making, and things like that, right? Eventually you've easily paid for the hardware that you're buying. I want to encourage you, if you're going to go the 3D printing route, to make thematic bases, terrain, game aids, maybe, things like that, but buy your models from Archon Studios. And there's two reasons for this. First of all, because they're going to be handing out the rules to all of us for free. For the overwhelming majority of companies, they will charge you anywhere from $25 to $50 to get just the rule book to learn how to play the game. They will then typically charge you an extra $25 to $50, sometimes even more than that, to get your army book. And you'd have to buy an individual army book for every single one that you want. So you could easily be spending a couple $100, easily $200, just to get the books you need to know which models you might want to get. And then from there, invest. Compare that to the $200 you can pay to get not one, but 2,000-point armies in the starter box, right? And that's $450 worth of actual value that you're just paying $200 for, okay? That is incredible value. You're going to be getting a placemat. You're going to be getting terrain as part of that. Okay, you're getting your game aids. You're getting two armies. Like they're already pricing themselves so well and so positively in our favor. I feel like as much as you can find some excellent STLs on My Mini Factory, among other places, for models, may I appeal to you and say, yes, use your hobbies like 3D printing to accessorize your hobby. I am building a Xeris board. I got in one game with it already with a friend of mine to test out the game. We loved it. It was very fun. It was very thematic. It was very cool. I do not think we're going to be getting a Xeris board anytime soon from the Archon Studios team, just because, again, like, it's a lot of plants, buddy. This is a lot of stuff, and that is not easy to make the way that they're making their stuff. So, like, again, like I feel like the terrain side of things, it's excellent. It's going to make our games very interesting, very thematic, but support the creators of the actual game by building your models from the official kits. Okay, that's going to be my plug. Now, if you are designing your own campaign and you're designing your own units and your own models and stuff like that, or if you want to use a proxy for fire bats, right? Because let's be honest, fire bats going to take a little while, right? Fire bats going to take a little while to actually show up. In as much as that's the case, may I recommend, sure, 3D print, right, for that sort of stuff. In the campaigns that we're going to be designing, we're going to be 3D printing a few things because we have specific characters, right, that we want to be able to showcase. And one of them, for example, is a ghost. We don't have ghosts yet, right? So because that, we're going to use her as a fill-in model so we can snap the pictures that we need for the specific elements that we're doing in the campaigns, more on the campaigns within the next couple of weeks once we finalize some of the wording. And we're going to kind of take you guys for a quick spin to show you what some of those scenarios are going to look like. But just suffice it to say for now, like that stuff, yes, 3D printing is great for that. But when it comes to the official models, when it comes to things that have been released, I won't be using any of my ghost models after the actual ghost models release because I'm going to buy some ghosts and I'm going to use those instead because those are the models made by the people who bought the license. Don't forget, they have to pay the license for everything that they're making. But two, and more than that, they put in the time. And I want to support quality creators, yes. And I'm going to start with the people who bought the license. Okay. You can do what you want. I don't think less of you for doing it. Again, I've worked for nonprofits. I have a limited budget. I thankfully learned about this game 6 to 8 months in advance of even the rules coming out, right? And being able to open beta test it. And so I was able to take up extra hours and work extra hours and make extra money. And that's where I am saving away so much money so that I can buy the models, right? Like, it was a strategic decision that I made. It worked out for me because I had the ability to do that. I don't look down on you if you can't. But if I may implore you, the cost is not that bad. And so my encouragement to you as a member of the StarCraft community, shell out the money. Pay the money for the models to the company so that we continue getting more models. Okay? It's in all of our best interest for us to do that. But when it comes to things like terrain and making new and interesting boards that you can use to draw in new players and keep your current player base really happy, may I recommend 3D printing. If you have thoughts on this, because this is 3D printing, so obviously all of us do, please let us know down in the comments below, and I will see you next time.